You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and thanks as always for coming back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. This week and for the next couple of weeks we are sponsored by Hiker Medals. I'll tell you about them in a moment. Today we've got a very interesting guest with Neville Harris, proprietress of my favourite hostel on the trail, Woods Hole. This was going to be another of those 15-minute chats about a hostel, but as you'll hear, Neville had other ideas, and while I had her on the mic, we just talked. Those of you who visited Woods Hole last year must have noticed that Neville wasn't happy, and in this chat she not only tells the history of the hostel but also her development into a hostel owner and the impact that it has had on her life. I've got to warn you though, Neville is very direct, so you may want to keep little ears away from time to time. Neville will be on soon. Also today I've got another special guest who has something to tell you, but I'll let you wait to find out who that is. But I will give you a clue. This person is known by just one name, like Elvis or Madonna. Finally, Paul Stutzman is into the Whites, that extraordinary clump of exciting mountains in New Hampshire. Unluckily for Paul, the weather sucks. By the way, while I think of Paul, he has graciously agreed to come along to my local AT club, the Appalachian Trail Club of Florida, to talk to our members in February. We are really looking forward to that. Now, before I go on, as most of you already know, I went on my first AT hike in 2014. When I finished, my pride and joy was that photo at the top of Mount Katahdin. It was all I needed. Then at the end of last year, after my second through hike, I was given a medal by a friend of mine. Yep, an AT medal to mark my through hike. It was amazing. It was beautifully designed and executed, really solid and surprisingly heavy, very substantial, and it was engraved on the back, Mighty Blue. My medal was made by Hiker Medals, and they are sponsoring our show today. And it's not only medals for the AT, they have a beautiful selection with the PCT, the CDT, the Camino in Spain, the John Muir Trail, and loads more from all over the world. So, if you want a special something for yourself or the hiker in your life, just go to hikermedals.com and tell them that Mighty Blue sent you. Yep, we've got another sponsor for a couple of weeks. I'll put a picture of my medal in the show notes so that you can see it. It's really terrific. And Wim from Hiker Medals will be on next week to tell you more about them. So now, in a stream of consciousness with stories about the history of Woods Hole and a journey at this beautiful place, is the ever-fascinating Neville Harris. My very favourite hostel on the AT in 2019 was Woods Hole Hostel, which I think is about 12 miles or so south of Petersburg. And it was open in 2014 but I didn't go when I went through in 2014. However, the place has been open for some years and the owner is Neville Harris. Hi, Neville. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm fine. How long has the hostel actually been a hostel?
So it got opened in 1986. So I think the math on that is like 33 or 34 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was my grandparents. They were close to the trail. Uh-huh. They were both environmentalists. My grandfather had a career in the environment. He actually spent the extent of his career basically going to landowners and buying land and turning it into national parks and national forests. Wow. So he had a real affinity for the outdoors. As to my grandmother, she was one of the few people to get a master's degree in her generation. She'd be 90.
Wow.
90 something now.
I would think, yeah.
So when she was born, you didn't get a master's degree as a female, and she ended up getting one. So she was an environmentalist as well. And so they had an affinity for the woods. They had an affinity for this place. This is where they kind of kindled their relationship and really fell in love. Uh-huh. Yeah. And so when they retired, they looked at themselves and said, hey, why don't we go back up to this amazing place and start fixing it up? And as they were fixing it up, hikers would naturally wander down for water or for a phone. You know, in those days, they didn't have phones. They had to use pay phones.
Good Lord.
And
some people won't understand that at all.
being out of connection with civilization for 6 months completely. It was, they really were disconnected. Yeah. So they would come here for a phone and such. And my granddad looked at my grandmother one day and just said, "Hey, why don't we open our place up? We're close enough to the trail and we really enjoy meeting these people." My grandmother, of course, she said, "No, I want nothing to do with those smelly people."
Quite right, too.
And in her mind's eye, so in her mind's eye, these people were bums. They weren't educated. They weren't, and she came to find out once she folded and said, "Okay, we'll give it a try." She sat at the breakfast table, and here you had an engineer, and you had a professor, and you had a really recently divorced man, and you had just all kinds, and predominantly white males. Let's be honest about that.
Very noticeable as well.
Yeah, to everyone of color, of different, come to the trail. We need you. We desperately, 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 desperately need you.
Certainly.
So it was just really something that opened her eyes to the world. She saw that these were really good, genuine people. So just kind of fast forwarding into the story, my grandfather ended up dying in the second year of the season, the second year they stayed open. Yeah, he died of a sudden heart attack. Very, very, very sudden. And it was a real shock. And so my grandmother looked at herself and she made the decision to carry forward with the hostel. It was a strange decision for her to make, but she just kept coming every year. And in every year coming, she loved it.
When did you get involved then?
Well, when I was 3 years old.
I thought you looked young.
Yeah, I was about 3. So we can't figure out exactly how old I was. I was either 3 or 5, but I mean, to be literal. So my sister and I were brought up with my grandparents in 1981, and we loved coming here. And so in coming here, we just it was a summer operated hostel again, not a year round hostel.
Sure.
So each year we come, my grandparents would just drag us along with them. And then when my granddad did die, my grandmother, she looked at my sister and I and she said, "Do you guys want to keep coming?" And we said, "Yes."
Wow.
And my aunt said, "I'll help you keep coming," because she was coming. She was making a long drive from Atlanta. That was her home base was Atlanta. This is really like a summer place, or it was. Now I live here year round.
Yeah.
And so here she said, "Okay, well, the grandkids want to keep coming. The hiker community seems to really care about me." And so I'm 9 years old at this point and still coming with my grandmother. And then this is when I kind of took ownership, not ownership to the hostel, but ownership to this experience.
Sure.
When I was 21 years old, a girlfriend and I were on the phone and we were both like, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" And I had just read Henry David Thoreau. I thought, gosh, I would love to go live in the woods. Now, I have no idea why didn't hiking the Appalachian Trail enter my mind? I have no idea. That seems silly to me now. I'm like, what? Why did I do that? Instead, we opted to both come live in the woods. Unfortunately, my girlfriend, she had terrible allergies to this space in particular. So she said, I can't do it. And I said, gosh, I'm loving this. I don't want to leave. I was living the artist's dream. I was able to paint and do art in the morning, and I was able to walk in the afternoon, just embrace myself in nature. Nice. And I actually came through some pretty traumatic stuff in my 20s by living here. I was able to be in the woods. I was able to feel anger, and I was able to feel sadness, and I was able to feel emotions that I really hadn't tapped into before. This was also a time where I had done drugs, I had done alcohol in high school and in college. And I had met a boy who had not drank. He'd not done drugs. And I was like, this is interesting. You sound like you're having fun. Like, he was doing things at midnight that I knew I could not do at midnight because I would have been drunk I would have been high. Right. And so I decided to kind of play with this idea of sobriety, not like look at it like something that was, I was not an addict of any nature. I didn't like have like these things where I was like, it wasn't perceptually ruining my life. But in hindsight, it was totally ruining my life.
When that is your life, you don't think there's anything wrong with it until you realize you live another life. Then you realize there was something wrong with it.
You're like, wow, like I have so much freedom now. So I came to the woods. I lived here when I was 21.
Uh-huh.
I went on those walks. I faced sobriety on a whole new level. And then the hikers would come down. And it was the hikers, they would come down and I'd feed them breakfast, let them stay for free in the bunkhouse, just like
Sure.
my grandmother had done.
Right.
My grandmother was so excited that I had opted to live here. She was very, very supportive of me living here. She actually had suggested in the beginning I pay the electric bill, and at the end, she paid the electric bill because she was so glad that I got this opportunity.
Cool.
That's about all there was an electric bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then financially, I wasn't in a job force, but what was happening was my dad, who was a doctor, was giving me an allowance, and I had made a conscious decision not to ask my dad to like cut me off.
Right.
And my dad, for some reason, had made a conscious decision to say, you know, I'm just going to keep giving Neville an allowance. I like to tell people it was my 5th year of college because my sister had taken a 5th year of college. So my dad kept giving me a monthly allowance. I managed to live off that monthly allowance and save money. And to the extent that I actually was able to buy a plane ticket to go to India that spring, which totally changed my world. So here I lived in the fall of that year. I lived at the cabin, immersed myself with the hikers, got to know the hiker community, fell in love with the hiker community, really loved who I was meeting, really loved the conversations I was having. One of the conversations that I was having was with this man that was just dealing with anger issues. He was angry. And I was dealing with these same similar anger issues. And he looked at me at the breakfast table and he said, well, what do you do? Like, what do you do about these anger issues? And I said, well, what I do is I've just been going to the woods and I literally take it out on a tree. Like I get the emotion and I express the emotion, but not on a person, just on the earth, because the earth can handle it. The earth has that integrity to handle our emotions. People know that's not fair to them. And he kind of heard me and I kind of knew what I was feeling, which was to get the emotion out. But now I wonder if that's the right thing, because there's kind of this area where you don't really need to get the emotion out. You actually need to just see it, observe it, and just let it ripple out. But I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, or even a professional.
No, but everybody copes with anger in their own different ways, don't they? And this is to say you cope with your anger. So who was this guy then?
Yeah.
Who was this guy?
He was a hiker. He was in his 30s or his 40s. And I just remember us connecting based on having these, like, you know, and a lot of my anger was I don't know where it was coming from. Maybe it was coming from the drugs and alcohol. Maybe it was coming from me, it was just there. And it was something I'd never experienced before. And it was coming up. And
how long ago was this?
So this was 20 years ago. I'm 41.
Right.
And literally,
this is really that long
21. Ago. Yeah, wow. 20 years ago. Yeah.
And so what? So did you take over the hostel then? Totally. Had you taken over the hostel?
My grandmother was still alive.
Oh, she still did it, was she? Oh, right.
Oh, right. But now I had a special affinity for it. And so here that affinity was there. So I made sure, if I could, again, once the 5th year was up, I called my dad. I said, hey, Dad, you know, you can take me off of this allowance. And he said, are you sure? I said, yes. And then I lived with my grandmother. so I lived with my grandmother.
I got to say, this doesn't sound the toughest life you'd be living.
Well, you know, it's not the toughest life, but everyone has their toughness.
Totally.
So at 22 years old, I lived with my grandmother till I was 24, and that was another element of my sobriety, like I talked about. I at that really ripe age where I should have been hanging out with my peers, I was hanging out with 80-year-olds and 70-year-olds, and I was hanging out with older women, and it was kind of an interesting stage of my life. But what it brought to was an ability to hang out with my grandmother and have a bedtime at 10 o'clock. And then I worked at a preschool, so I did get a job.
Right.
I got to pursue my art. And then I knew after 2 years that I needed to move out, and I needed something. I was still feeling suppressed and depressed, like depressed.
Wow.
So I needed to move out. And I moved to West Virginia, and I worked at a homeless camp for homeless kids. And then I became a substitute teacher, which was a real kind of strange one for my family. They were like, what are you doing? Like, where is your career path? And for me, it was just like, this isn't a career path. This is a lifestyle choice. Like, I want to make a lifestyle out of this life. like money comes and it goes, but the lifestyle we choose for ourselves is so much more a part of who we are. And so I knew that at that ripe age, that I wanted a lifestyle, not a bank account. So here I was on the path of, being an artist and being a substitute teacher. And that's about the time I came to the point where as I was a substitute teacher, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to be? Like, what am I going to be when I grow up? So it became a choice between massage therapy and school teaching. And I was hung up on those two. Like, which should I be? I could be a massage therapist. That just sounds so liberating and so hippie and just so right-minded. I could be a school teacher, and that just sounds so practical and just. So I decided to go be a massage therapist first.
I had a massage when I came to Woods Hole last year. You are the most powerful massage therapist I've ever had, and that includes men. And you're only a tiny young woman, and it was amazing to me that I almost thought somebody had taken over. You're so powerful.
Well, I had the advantage of having that massage in India, and from a woman, and I also had the advantage of having worked with pottery. I'm typically a very grounded person. So all these elements kind of come together, and I'll agree I'm a very good therapist.
So tell us then, this was your build up and your original association with the hostel, and you went to India and you came back. When did you get full time into the hostel where you were running it and basically looking after it?
Okay. So we're getting to that. So first, we have to meet my ex-husband. So I met my ex-husband in 2005. So once I had decided what I was going to be when I grew up, massage therapist, school teacher, I ended up deciding after the massage therapy degree that, God, how am I going to open a business? Like, that's a whole field I'm not even tapped into. Sure. So I'll go be a school teacher. So I ended up going to be a school teacher. And in the midst of this, I decided to come visit my grandmother. And in those days, because I was in my 20s, and I know you want to get to the part where how did I come to run the hostel, but this backstory
is the
meat to how it all happened. So I come to visit my grandmother, and mind you, I had just been fired from a job, and it was a hard thing. So I come up here, and I had a classic episode of meeting a hiker. And all those hikers that might have felt synergy for me in those days, they totally could have asked me out, but they didn't. Well, this guy, I would literally meet a hiker, and it all started when I was 21, when I ran the hostel. I would meet a hiker. I would wonder if, about that one hiker, I wouldn't hook up with him. I wouldn't flirt with him. I would just have this compelling wondering. I wonder if he's the one. I wonder if he's the one. Because I had a real drive to get married, Yeah. And so I meet this person. He comes up on the porch, and I look at him, and I said, okay, it's not going to be him. I've got to stop doing this. And so I spent a little bit of time with him. And this is Michael, my ex-husband.
Yeah.
I spent a little bit of time with him. And then I run off to go fix the plumbing. So now he thinks I'm a plumber, which I thought was funny.
That's always impressive, yeah. A female as a plumber, yeah.
It was just impressive girl that was helping her grandmother live in the woods. And then the next day, I helped black pack him into Parisburg, and we got to talk there. And there were just some connecting points. And he became very attractive to me all of a sudden. I was like, I like this guy. He's so interesting. Uh-huh. So that fall of that year.
And he was doing the through hike at the time, was he?
He was doing a through hike.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah,
he was on the trail. He was actually a biochemist out in California. Uh-huh. He burned out of that job. And the window at the door flew wide open for him to hike the trail. Sure. The apartment lease was up. The girlfriend was no longer there. The situation was right. The timing was right. The money was there. And he had done weekend backpacking trips. He'd been really an avid backpacker on weekends. So it was perfect timing. And we just happened to meet. And so when he hiked in, again, it was just like every other hiker, but this guy was like, hey, don't fall in love with this one. And then that fall, I hear from him. He just happens to have my email. Oh, because I just happened to give him my email. He was the only hiker that I actually gave my connection to. Said, hey, stay in touch.
My guess is that all these people who met this slim young woman back in 2004, 2005, hearing that they could have asked you out, and you might actually have said yes. It's hilarious to me.
I know. breaks your heart, doesn't it?
That's funny.
The first year that Michael and I were here, like the 2009 year when we finally moved here, I remember being around hikers. And my subconscious comes up, or my mind will speak things and it won't necessarily be, but my subconscious would look at another guy and the guy would go, well, how did he get you? Like, how did he get so lucky to have you? Or, like something cute like that. And those were the right days. Those were the days where, okay, so here Michael and I meet. And when we meet, there's no foresight of us running the hostel and living here. That's not in our future.
Sure.
What's in our future is that we both have similar interests. We're definitely interested in community. We're both interested in organic gardening. We dive deep into sustainable practices. So in 2006, Michael moves to Georgia, which is where I was living, and finishing up that graduate degree to become a school teacher.
Sure.
Massage therapy may or may not have panned out, but I was too fearful of that. I could not see myself as a business person. And so when Michael moved down and I was pursuing the teaching certification, my grandmother, in our first year of being together, we literally buy a house.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy, wild move. The market hadn't crashed yet.
Nice.
We find the most cute, adorable house. And we end up taking all of Michael's mad, awesome skills, and we're doing gardening. We're doing chickens in the backyard. We're doing beekeeping for the first time ever. And we're making a connection with the hiker hostel up in Dahlonega, Georgia, which is no longer the hiker hostel. Some of us know. But it was an amazing hostel. We make it a connection with Josh and Lee just simply because we had bees and they had bees. Uh-huh. And so we become like really neat friends because of that. So we're doing all these crazy projects. My mom looks at Michael and I, and she just can tell, like, these two can handle a tough life. And living at Woods Hole would be considered a tough life because it's so isolated and you've got to have some skills.
Sure.
As that's happening and we're doing all these projects, my grandmother goes to the doctor and finds out she gets sick. And she finds out that she has 6 months to live. She has a nasty ovarian cancer. Oh, she has kidney problems. And so there's no way that chemotherapy is going to be of any advantage. And so she's got 6 months to live. Jeez. This is the part where just like, I walk into the hospital room and like the first thing my grandmother says when I walk into the hospital room, she doesn't say like, all right, I've got 6 months to live. I've got to live out those last minute goals. Like I'm going to go to Australia, like I've always wanted to go to or something.
Sure.
She says, I hope those doctors get their act together. I've got to get to the cabin.
Oh my God.
like 6 months to live and you've got to get to the rusty, nasty, broken down log cabin in the woods. Like, what? So my mom is very of sound mind. Like she likes things to be in order. She likes things to be in place. And her jaw is dropping at this point. She's rustic, but she likes the niceties of life.
Sure.
She wants my grandmother. She doesn't like this idea. So I understand as well. In my mom's defense completely, I was totally on my mom's side. She said, how about we get the cabin? How about we get the doctors in order? We get everything they have planned out for you, and then you go. And how about, since you were supposed to go on, open up May 1st, why don't we open up June 1st and stay for just 1 month?
Sure.
And my grandmother folded and said, okay, I'll do that. And now this is speaking to everyone out there who has someone in their life that's either sick or dying or close to death. I cannot speak highly enough of to be around someone when they know they're dying. It's the biggest gift you can ever, ever, ever give yourself. Now, yeah. I know everybody's different. People have different places in life, but I've been able to be around both grandparents when they've been very sick. My grandmother was amazing. It just gives me chills to think about. We bonded in a way I don't think we'd ever bonded before. I got to spend 1 month. I came up here, and this was 2007. So I came up here with her in June, and we spent 1 month together. And we ran the hostel together. I became like a hostel person. Like I
Wow.
I had already known the ropes because I spent 2006 up here with her as well.
Sure.
My affinity was growing strong, and Michael could recognize that. So he'd say, yeah, go, I'll take care of things here. And so I would come spend time with my grandmother, helping her run the hostel. Oh, it was just amazing.
At that time, was she,
Yeah.
I mean, you said she had 6 months to live. Was she displaying a real sickness? Did she have to be cared for the whole time, or was she trying to run the hospital with you?
She was tough. There was one night, so I like to sleep outside. So I slept on the side porch, and she would sleep in her room. And there was one night where, it was a couple nights. There was one night where she said, Neville, will you just sleep with me tonight? Because I think she was just afraid. Like, I would
Sure.
wake up every morning and wonder if she'd be dead.
Yeah.
Like, I would wonder, is she going to be she wasn't sickly acting, but we knew she had a terminal disease, so things can happen.
Sure.
And there was one night, about the most sickness that I saw in her there was a night that she asked me to place her hand on her belly. She's a large woman.
Sure.
And she just said, can you just feel this for me? And I felt her belly, and it was the most weirdest, most awful thing, whatever was going on in there.
Huh.
So it was strange because, like, she didn't show pain, and that might be medicine she was on. We didn't talk about that. She just took her hand, and she put a big pile of pills in her hand, and she said, this is what the doctors have me on. Like, I mean, it was crazy amounts of pills. And then it was just every night. I didn't cook dinner. Everybody commends me for cooking amazing meals. Mama Tilly, that's what I called my grandmother, Mama Tilly. Mama Tilly cooked every night, and I let her
Oh my
what
gosh.
she wanted to do. So she would put us together some cute, like, sweet vegetarian dinner because I was a vegetarian. So she supported me in that. And then she would make breakfast for the hikers the next morning, the full spread again because I was there.
Was that the time that you started? Would you call it the thankfulness circle, where you'll stand around, hold hands before a meal?
That wasn't Mama Tilly, but that's why we do. So
Right.
what happened is I would watch hikers. So Mama Tilly would insist on doing a blessing.
Uh-huh.
And she would say, does anyone want to offer up a blessing?
Sure.
I mean, she was bedtime oriented. Of course she was blessing oriented. and so even she had a great story about a couple of pagan women that came through, and they offered up a pagan blessing.
All right.
She was totally cool with it. She was like,
Was she?
awesome. Someone offered up. And then if someone did not offer up their blessing, she actually had a blessing that a hiker had written on his way into Parisburg.
Huh.
He had written this blessing out in his head, and he mailed it back to her. And so anytime a hiker didn't offer a blessing, she offered up the blessing that that hiker had written in his head on the way to town.
How did that then develop into the thankfulness circle? 'Cause I'll tell listeners what it was from my point of view. We'd all hold hands. We'd go around basically to introduce yourself and say what you were thankful for, I seem to remember. Mm-hmm. And I know some people may be rolling their eyes at that, but there's something that's very focusing when you know it's coming around to you, and it also allows you an insight into other people around the table. So I was at yours for I think 2 nights, and I think it was a really nice thing to do.
There's 2 reasons that we came. Well, mainly one reason. There's a hostel down in Georgia. It's a really great hostel, and it's called the Hostel in the Forest.
Uh-huh.
And at that hostel, they did that circle. And Michael and I both, that was a connecting place for Michael and I. We both had been there before. We both resonated around that. And so we look at that hostel, and we just knew that we knew how it felt to be in that circle as guests and to go around that circle and say something we were thankful for.
Nice.
We were just like, it worked.
Nice.
And then the other thing was I had, this is kind of a side reason. I'd kept a journal for years, and it just became really apparent that you could have a really, really hard day that day, and you could reflect on that day and go, that was a sucky day.
Yeah.
And yet, if you found something, you looked at yourself and said, well, what is one thing today that I can be thankful for? In this whole day, what can I be thankful for? It can turn your entire day around. And so to be able to take a moment in our day and just say, what am I thankful for? Because we have 2 perspectives. We can look at things and we can say, this really was awful, or this really was great. it's just a lot more helpful being a human being and finding the gratitude in it. I'm sorry. It is.
I definitely felt the power of that when I was there last year. I mean, to be honest with you, when it was when it was coming round to me, I thought, oh my God, what do I say? What am I thankful for? But the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it. I really did. Now, obviously, Mama Tilly passed, and you and Michael came there. Now, I know when I went through in 2019, this was a really difficult time for you because I know you and Michael had only recently split a few months before. And it must have been, and I remember thinking at the time, because you and I had a long conversation one evening after everybody else had gone to bed. It must have been
very grateful for that conversation, by the way.
Oh, good, thank you.
After that conversation, I was fixed. Your conversation with me fixed me. Yeah, thank you.
How nice. Yeah. But I was thinking, and I've thought about this a few more times, and this is why I was reluctant to get back in touch with you to interview you for the show, because I didn't know whether you'd want to talk about it. But to showing your grief at your marriage breakdown in full view of everybody, did you consider letting the place go, or just simply closing down, or
no.
you just pushed on through, didn't you?
That wasn't an option.
Right, you just pushed on through.
It wasn't even an option. Yeah, it wasn't an option for Michael. It wasn't an option for me.
Right.
Our divorce was one of the. I hope it's the hardest thing I ever go through. If it's if it's not,
yes.
I've not learned anything.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. I think I'm going to get to your answer. Maybe ask your question again, because I don't really know where to start with the answer.
It was really the fact that when I was there, it was clear to me and the people I was with that you were struggling so much.
Yes.
And we were marveled at the fact that you would carry on doing what you were doing when really your grief was in full view of everybody. And it was kind of jarring to see. And I just wondered how you coped with it, whether you didn't consider just closing down, but you decided to carry on, obviously.
Okay, so I think I have the answer now. So the grief had been happening for several years. You weren't seeing the beginning of the grief. You were seeing the end of the grief.
Yeah.
It wasn't like one day we woke up and we were just like, this is not right.
Uh-huh.
It was like, there was a compilation of our relationship, which was like a mountain. Uh-huh. We were climbing the mountain and we were working hard together, and we got to the top of the mountain. And then when we got to the top of the mountain, it's just like we just broke. And neither one of us, I think to this day, both of us still genuinely love each other. But we just, like Michael said, we just got toxic for each other. Like it was incidental. It was not intended. Both of us did not have the intention to enter into a promise and a relationship together to break it. But at the same time, there's all of these facets to being a human being that none of us can explain. Sure. And that we still have to honor. And in that honoring of that, like there were years where I would go into that circle of thanks. And there was one year I step into the circle and I put my face on, I do my thing, and I say what I'm thankful for, and I just start crying.
Oh,
There's so much pain inside of me. This hiker looks to my left, and I literally saw him see my pain. He looked at me and he said, "Thank you." And I was like, "Really? You're welcome." And he was like, "I was just experiencing so much pain. And because you just so willingly showed me your pain, I feel better." I said, "Gladly, if I can make somebody feel better with my pain any day, this is so worth it." It didn't feel right to close the hostel at any point. There was a point where I think Michael and I had struggled with the idea we could close and just work on the relationship.
Sure.
And that is probably an area that I continue to wonder. And now that it's done, I don't wonder. We made choices. We make choices to the best of our ability.
Of course.
Should we have closed? Maybe. I don't know. But I know that there's a few things I know. I know that I got so much support from the hiker community through such a hard decision, a hard time.
I'm sure you did. I could see people, and certainly that you had the staff working for you who loved you. Mm-hmm. You know, they would do anything for you as well. And that must have given you some strength as well.
So much strength. And then to make it even, wilder is Michael, then being my ex-husband, he made the sound choice. You know what? I know I've got projects that I didn't finish there. I don't want to leave Neville stuck with these projects undone. Now, it was really hard for him to come back. It got to
Sure.
a point where I was like,
Sure.
this is too hard for you to keep coming back. I still deeply love you. I'm still sexually attached to you. And so I had to let that go, that idea go, that he could keep coming back. But he actually got 99% of the projects done. And I came to a point in myself where I knew that I could either do it on my own, or I could ask for solid sound help or make mistakes. But the best thing, if anybody is going through anything like this, where they know that something's wrong with their relationship, they know that something's right, the first thing I really would recommend is to both of you seek a psychiatrist or psychologist, someone of like with a degree. I actually started seeing a psychiatrist this past year.
Sure.
My struggling was apparent to you. Well, it was also apparent to some of my meditation teachers. And they got on the phone, they called me and they said, Neville, you are going through a hard time. You need to talk to somebody. You need to like get these emotions out. And the first thing to do is to talk to somebody. And then the next thing is to meditate. So I honored their suggestion and I went to see a psychiatrist. But this time, instead of going to a psychiatrist, and for me, not for everybody out there, but for me, I was like, yeah, something's right about my life. Like something really is working.
Sure.
So I've been going to the psychiatrist and I literally was like, okay, here's it all out on the table, but something is going right. And I can't put my hand on it, but something really is going right. Something's working here. And then the psychiatrist would use her own education and her own backup of information that I gave her and her own like really cool wisdom. I really got lucky. I found a good psychiatrist. And she was able to give me my power back. Like as a female, as a woman, it's like I gave all my power away. Like I just like, my power was gone. Like whoever I was had slipped into the abyss. My 21-year-old self who figured out how to travel to India on her own, like as a 5 foot, 100-pound tall, whatever, smushable young lady.
Like, yeah, because you're not a big girl, are you?
I'm not like gonna I'm not gonna power my, but that kind of power, that inner female power, it was gone. And it wasn't Michael's fault. It wasn't, to blame it on Michael would be like cruel to him. It was just part of like growing up, like I'm 41 years old and I get to keep growing up.
So tell me now then, Neville, because you clearly weren't last year. A year later now, nearly a year later, are you happy again?
Definitely. I'm happier than I've ever been.
Good.
I can say I'm not done struggling. I'm not done going through life's battles and life's like queries. But at 41, I wouldn't be 21 again. I wouldn't be 31 again.
Tell me about 41, it. I'm 67.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
I know that just because our hardships are our best teachers does not mean we need to get stuck there. And I got stuck in a hardship.
Sure.
And my relationship, it was not his fault. Whatever happened.
It is never, ever, ever one person's fault. Never is.
No.
And to be fair, I do know what I was speaking of, having been divorced 3 times myself. It tended to be mainly my fault, but it is never 100% one person's fault. And I'm so glad that you seem to be happier now. But how did the rest of the season go last year? Did you just gradually improve, or did you just started feeling this is something I can do, and you got all your power back?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think I'm still working on some improving areas. Like I said, after talking to you and after seeing Jester the next day, I just knew. I was like, wow, they are so right. I have a dark cloud over me. And I just took the dark cloud away. Just made a snap of the fingers choice. But that doesn't mean that like when things got hard, I didn't go into those little recesses of my mind, which are like, is this right? That still was there. That still took time. And that I'm not even like to give me another couple years. But the thing I know is I know it's really nice to take someone that you went through something so hard and awful with and know that I can pick up the phone and say, it's not that I still love you on the level that I want you to come back into my home with me, but I will always love you because of what we went through together. Sure. And I will always love you because of the integrity that we both tried.
I totally identify with that. I totally understand
Yeah.
that. I really do.
But I don't,
Really
do I want to go back and do it all again? Heck no.
do.
Do I want to move forward, and do I want to have, so the hostel itself as an entity it's very apparent to me that it's been a very neat place to share with people, to go, like people look at me and they're like, well, do you do everything self-sustainable? Are you what are you doing? How do you do this on your own?
Yes.
The first thing I say is I don't do it on my own. Even if I don't have a partner, like an ex-husband, I have an incredible network of friends.
Yes. When I was there, you had that great older guy. I say older guy, he was younger than me, but an older guy who was cooking a lot of the meals for you, or some of the meals for you as well.
Oh, yeah.
And he was.
Smurf.
That's right, Papa Smurf, and he did some great food. But we had a great. I actually think I was there for 3 days, not 2 days. Now I think about it, but it seemed it seemed a big part of my hike, and I'm so glad that you've kind of come through it because it's such a popular hostel anyway, isn't it? But now, realize, but if people listen to this, they're going to think, oh, she's single again now. So hikers coming through. All the hikers they'll be hitting upon you again this year.
Not wondering if the cards are off the table, everybody. Don't you dare.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious.
No, I'm more independent and more grateful to be single than anything. And I'm not jumping into the next relationship, that's for sure. But what I am is, I think the thing that's important to me is that the hostel, I've always told people that the hostel is, if you go back to the beginning of our story, when I was in my 20s, there was that moment in my life where I realized I wanted a lifestyle, not a bank account.
Absolutely.
And that's what I want to perpetuate. This hostel to me is it's not a business. So a lot of folks want to create a business. And I have a business because that was just what made the most sense. Michael and I figured that out together, that made more sense to have a business than to continue it forward as a donation-based hostel. And it wasn't even donation-based when my grandmother ran. It was free, 100% free.
Wow.
And maybe it'll be free again, but that right now I battle that all the time. I would like to take money off the table. So I will say this, and I always like to speak up for the jar. In order to take money off the table for those guys that are limited on their budget and they can't afford, this is one place on the Appalachian Trail you do not have to worry about money. There's a perceptual cost. I've identified labeled costs, but what I've done is I've created a jar that allows people to put money into. And then what happens is someone comes down and they say, I'll just camp. And I'll say, you know what? It's cold outside. There's plenty of room in the bunkhouse. I'll take care of you being in the bunkhouse. I'll take care of your dinner. Don't worry about the rest. And if you really, really, really want to think about the true monks and nuns of our world, the true people who are really renouncing all of their belongings, are also renouncing that they are humble enough to be given to. If they can't afford, they're humble enough to say thank you instead of saying, oh, I have an ego around me that can't afford, No, this system that I created, it's not that I created it, it's been supported. And it's just amazing to watch people give to it. And it's amazing to watch people receive from it. And I just get to be lucky enough to be on either end of that. I'm so lucky.
I tell you what, Neville, I'm so glad we did speak. This conversation didn't go in any the direction I was expecting it to go. I thought we were going to talk about the hostel. I'm going to make this a full length episode because I think you said so many things that people would want to know about the hostel. You've been open and honest. Perhaps I'm going to give you the opportunity to listen to this first before I put it out there. You may want to say, let's see. But I so thank you for talking to me about it. And as I said to you, I loved being in the hostel. And if any way that I contributed to helping you last year, then I'm obviously grateful that happened as well. So I appreciate you coming on the show. Yeah,
isn't that neat to hear? You really did. You really, really did. And I didn't know you before. After I met you, I was like, oh, he's famous. How cool. So it was really neat to not know that you were famous and then to have you help me so much. You really did help me a lot. I really appreciate you.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks for talking to us. And I'll talk to you. I'm definitely going to talk to you again sometime, okay?
Wonderful. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Have a good day. Bye.
And you. She is something, isn't she? As I was editing that chat, I realised that Neville, despite not being a hiker, really understands the trail and the people on it. I thought that she was able to distill many of the feelings about the trail that I've had, but I've rarely articulated. And of course, she's never less than fascinating. Even more reason to love her. Now, another special guest. You may have heard of Matthew Norman, but the name may just ring a bell. If I said the name Odie, then I'm sure a lot more of you will know who I'm talking about. So here is Matthew Norman, or Odie. Now, here's somebody I'm sure you all know. I had him on the show a few years ago. His real name is Matthew Norman, but really everybody refers to him as Odie. Hi, Odie. How you doing?
Hey, everybody at home. How are you guys? I'm Odie. Hi.
You know, it's quite something, Odie, isn't it, when you are referred to by just one name. There's probably Dixie, and there's Darwin, I guess, and there's you. That's it.
Dixie, Darwin, Madonna, Odie.
There you go. How about that?
You know, I've always said you hike a long distance trail in order to find yourself, and the first thing they do is rename you.
Isn't that weird? Wow, that's a deep thing, and you know, we might get into that another time actually, because that is quite a thought process. Yeah, they do rename you, but it does allow you, I think, when you're hiking a trail, to reinvent yourself, which, you know, and actually this kind of moves us on to what I want to talk about, because trail names are where it's at, you know, on the trail, obviously. And this is a really pivotal time of the year for you, isn't it? Tell us what you've been up to recently, because I have been following the drama on Facebook.
I try to be open about everything that I'm doing, but so I make the Hiker Yearbook for both the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail.
Yeah.
And what that is, people send in their photos of them on trail, and then if they finish the trail, they send in that as well. So they send in their trail name, their real name, and then also their email. And the reason I do this is because you only know people by their trail name, like Squirrels, Tinkle Toes, Aristotle. So then when you get home and you try to find your really good friend Aristotle, you get online and some other guy keeps popping up that is not your really good friend.
And died 2,000 years ago.
Right. So, you know, what do you do? How do you find somebody that you literally only know their name is Aristotle?
Sure.
And that's the Hiker Yearbook. So the Hiker Yearbook takes their picture, their trail name, and then a contact information.
Right.
But in order to make it happen, I have about 3,000 hikers a year that send me all their information. And it's very rigid. I literally hand type in every single entry. I hired this girl Wanda this year, and she's helped me out, helped take some of the blow. But it's hand done. We hand change the name of the photo that they send me to their trail name. We type in their trail name. We type in their real name. We type in their email, and create a database. I'm
sure your process has improved over the years, though, hasn't it? It must have done, or is it still pretty much as it was when you started?
It's a lot better than it was,
right.
But I'm about to grow. I'm so excited. I'm about to get my website to actually do most of my data entry for me.
Good.
Did not even realize that was a thing. But these millennials, they got some stuff figured out.
Yeah. There's good and bad about that, but some of the stuff that's good is so amazing, isn't it? When a youngster shows you something, the capabilities of what your computer or your phone can do, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Oh, man, it's crazy. Yeah, I watched a 2-year-old the other day flipping through YouTube, you know. You're two. Like, hey, you're supposed to be reading books that say ABC. And he's like, oh, I don't like this video, delete, whatever.
Yeah. So tell us about, I think your first yearbook was 2014 or 2013?
2014.
2014. And I've always regretted not being in the 2014 yearbook, because I went on the trail that year. And I won't say that being in the book in 2019 was my motivation for doing it again last year, but it was definitely one of the things I thought about when I started, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. So
wonderful.
What happened? How did you suddenly, was there a flash of inspiration? You thought, this makes no sense. I can't catch up with people. Was there a moment you realized this was something that was going to work out for you?
Oh, yeah, it's a lot. There's only 400 people in the very first Hiker Yearbook in 2014.
Yeah.
The idea for the yearbook did come in a flash about 2 weeks before Trail Days in 2014.
Right.
This other guy had made a book in 2013 it was called Northbound.
Right.
And what he did is he took about 30 or 40 hikers' pictures and he put them in the book. I was one of the hikers and I was tagged in a photo online. And then I called him. I was like, I want this book. I need something that attaches me back to the trail.
Yeah.
He said, oh, I've already sold out of them. So that night, out of a dead sleep, I woke up and I was like, I know what he should do. He should take a picture of every single person on the trail and get their trail names and contact information, and then people could be able to find Aristotle. So I couldn't wait to call him the next day to tell him my plan for his life. And so I called him, and he was like, that sounds extremely ambitious to take everybody's photo, but you should do that. Well, I can't do that. I'm not a photographer. And then he said, well, honestly, it would be impossible to take everybody's photo on the trail. Like, you have to realize that. So what you have to do is convince them to send you their photo. And I said, okay, well, yeah, that's what you should do then. Well, no, that's what you should do. I said, okay, I could do this. So I called my good friend Nima that I hiked with and my good friend Patchouli, and I gave them this crazy idea. So we agreed that we could probably do this, but we had to act quickly. We only had 2 weeks before Trail Days in 2014.
Wow.
So we hired a photographer and we all went to Trail Days. And then Patchouli's sister had made us tons of baked goods. And I was sitting there giving out free, apple fritters and stuff, saying, hey, I have this wonderful idea. You don't realize it yet, but when you get home, you're not going to be able to find most of your friends. And I can probably fix that if you'll please just go get your picture made and give me your trail name. So all of them were like, hey, you're giving us food. Sure.
That'll always do it, won't it?
yeah, that's free food.
Yeah.
So the first day of Trail Days, we only got about 50 hikers that did it. But all 50 of those hikers went out into the festival and they said, hey, these people over there, they said they're going to make a book for us so that we can reconnect after the trail and we'll have this book.
Sure. And
it exploded. So the second day of Trail Days, which was our last day, we had 350 people come through the photo booth.
Oh my gosh.
Every person that came in and heard the idea was like, oh yes. And then they went out and they told people. That Sunday, we were just completely ran over and we still had hikers running up going, hey, we heard about this thing. Can we get our picture? Like, oh yeah, please, So it was wonderful, but that was all we did. So we went home. I went back to my job. Nima went back to hers, but Julie went back to hers. And we got online and Googled, how do you make a yearbook?
Simple as that. Wow.
None of us were in yearbook staff.
Yeah, of course.
So throughout the first year, we just made the book and with the realization that it wasn't going to take off with a lot of sales or anything because, it had never existed before.
Sure.
But we had to do it. We had to at least put one out. So we did it throughout the year. Nima and I worked extremely hard. And then finally we put out a 100-page book that had everyone's trail name and picture and contact information in the back. And then we put out, I think we sent everybody one email and said, hey, this book's available if y'all want to buy it. And we sold about 30 copies, 2 of which to my mom.
Mums always do that, don't they?
To my mom, 2 to Patchouli's mom, 2 to Nima's mom. but we sold about 25 books to other people. So then over the years, I printed 100, and over the years, we've gotten rid of all of them.
Right.
So now I have the 2014 yearbook. And if there's anybody out there listening right now, and you have a 2014 yearbook, that is one of 100, and I promise to never print them again.
Oh, I was going to ask you, Odie, and I've mentioned this to you before, I'd love you to redo 2014, get the second edition or something. I can send my picture in. I'm sure loads of people will send their picture in to do a second book.
I thought about retrograding too. I could do a 2013, go on from there.
Of course.
That's all. Once I get the website automized, I'll have more time for things like that. Cause I'd love to go back all the way to Earl Schaefer's year will be easy.
Oh, wow. That would be really cool. And now actually, as you mentioned earlier on, you do both the AT and the PCT. How are you making that logistically possible? Because I know from what I see on your Facebook, as I say, you are a sharer. What I see on your Facebook, you are really maybe you are stressed, but you really are getting into it and so on. How do you do the PCT and the AT? Do you go out to the PCT?
So I had this girl that was helping me on the home front, she worked out of her home for 3 years on this project and like handled the emails and stuff.
Right.
So I had always gotten people calling me that had hiked the AT and said, hey, do a PCT yearbook.
Right.
And I said, well, I mean, PCT doesn't have the same trail days. They don't have, I'm not out there as much. I just, there's just all these excuses. But constantly I was getting emails and phone calls, do the PCT yearbook.
Yeah.
So I ran by Danielle and I said, Danielle, I don't know if we could do this. We should do this or not. And man, her eyes lit up. She was like, this is something you must do. I'm going to buy you a plane ticket right now to go out to PCT and hike for a month and just tell them that you're going to do it. And then if they send us their photos, great. If they don't, hey, we tried. But do this. So I had a knot in my stomach the whole year. 3 days before actually flying out to the PCT, I only had 4 weeks to hike to just literally tell everybody.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, I just don't know. I called Danielle and I was like, I can't do this. And Danielle said, the plane ticket's already bought. If nothing else, just go on out to Washington and take 3 or 4 days and have a vacation. And then I'll change your plane ticket so that you can come back after 3 or 4 days. Like, there's no reason to waste the plane ticket. I'm like, okay. So got on the plane, flew out to Washington. I landed in Washington. I called her up and she said, I'm not changing your plane ticket. You're stuck out there for a month. So you might as well go hike.
All right. She's a good girl. Good for her.
Yeah, she's amazing. So I did. I hiked, and all I did was I had an Appalachian Trail yearbook in my backpack.
Uh-huh.
When I would see a hiker, I'd pull it out and I'd say, hey man, I'm trying to do this on the PCT. If you would like it, send me your photo. I figure in about a month's time, I was only able to speak to about 300 people doing that. I came home. We ended up receiving over 900 Pacific Crest Trail photos for the first PCT yearbook.
That's awesome. That is so. When does do they both come out at the same time of year? Or I know the new one for the AT is out soon. Is the PCT out at the same time?
Yes, I'll have both books actually wrapped up this coming Monday.
So how will people be able to get hold of the book this year? And you say it's going to be available Monday.
It'll be printed in about 3 to 4 weeks, but hikeryearbook.com.
Right.
I will actually be finished with design on Monday, and then it'll take them about 3 weeks to print. And then I actually hand wrap every single book.
Odie, you need to be more automated. You really do. Get this automation going. Get a 2-year-old working for you.
I hand tie a bow in every single book. I feel like it is a present that I'm giving, so I want it to be presented as a present. So I wrap it in purple tissue paper, and then I can tie a little hand-tied bow on it, and then I have a letter that I've written. Now, of course, I print that letter out because I can't write 2,000 letters, but I put the little letter inside the bow and send it off into the world.
That is so cool. Look, I tell you what, I really, really wanted to be in the 2014 book, and I really want you to redo it. But if you can't, I understand. But I'm so excited about the prospect of getting mine. And I admire you for doing this, man, because, as I say, you share what's going on, and often you're lurching from one disaster to another, but you're still going and you're still getting the book out there. And you know damn well the people on the trail, and I certainly see it on Facebook, they love you, and they really thank you for doing this. And I certainly thank you for doing it. And I just think, it's an awesome thing you're doing, and I cannot wait to get mine. So thanks very much for doing it and coming on and telling us about it.
I love the trail. I love the community. And my honest reason for all of this is I believe that when a person completes a long distance hike, they become a better person.
Yeah.
And the camaraderie and the family that forms while they're on that long distance hike has a lot to do with why they became a better person, because they became more accepting of different cultures, religions, experiences. So in the end, when you have all this greatness and all this energy that you can move forward with, the first problem you face is that you lose your support group.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
My vision is that if the communities can stay together over the years, even 15, 20 years from now, somebody pulls out their book and says, hey, I need to find Squirrel, and then sends him an email and reconnects and says, you know that idea we had where we were going to make the world a better place? Let's do it. But without having that way to do that, I think it's really impeded a lot of the blessings that hikers can give to the world. So that's all it is.
That is such a cool sentiment. And now when I open my book and I open that ribbon, I'm going to think about that. And I really appreciate you doing this, and we'll speak soon, okay, mate?
All right, great. Thank you so much for the call, and everybody, hikers hike.
Cheers. All the best. Bye. What a lovely thought he ended on. If you follow Odie on Facebook, you'll know how much of a sharer he truly is. But his heart is so within the trail, and in my view, he deserves to succeed in his wonderful project. With a bit of luck, I'll be seeing my book very soon. I absolutely can't wait. Next week, our main guest is a hiker. He's Rory Anderson, or Bigfoot. You're really going to enjoy Rory. He's a font of knowledge and a really affable guy to boot. Finally today, Paul Stutzman's Hiking Through takes us through New Hampshire and the magnificent White Mountains. I went through the Whites in 2019, in glorious late July and early August weather. Suffice it to say, Paul wasn't quite as lucky. I'll see you next week. Chapter 22, The White Mountains. Fargo and I sat at the Hikers' Welcome Hostel and listened to southbound hikers complain of brutal trail conditions in Maine and New Hampshire's White Mountains. These hikers had started on Mount Katahdin just a month ago and had only several hundred miles under their boots. We, on the other hand, had hiked over 1,800 miles and had already seen all kinds of trail conditions and weather. Fargo and I were certain the complaints came only because these southbounders were not yet in hiking shape. After everything I'd endured in the last 100 days, I was certain I had seen everything the trail could possibly throw at me. Then again, how many times had the Appalachian Trail already surprised me? We left the trail and stopped at the hostel in the tiny village of Glen Cliff, New Hampshire, nestled in the high mountain valley at the edge of the White Mountain National Forest. Tomorrow, Fargo and I would enter those White Mountains. We studied our guidebooks, charting our course for the next several days. Camping rules are very stringent in the Whites and tenting sites are limited. Hikers are rightfully concerned about the trek across these mountains. Scattered across the White Mountains are 8 huts maintained by the Appalachian Mountain Club in New Hampshire. These rustic mountain lodges are popular tourist destinations and a stay is quite costly. Most of the huts allow a limited number of through hikers to stay in exchange for work, usually sweeping or doing dishes in return for the privilege of sleeping on the floor and eating leftovers after the paying guests have finished with the meal. Fargo and I hoped to do several of these work for stays as we traversed the Whites. Padre and Rhino also stopped at Hikers' Welcome Hostel. Padre had a habit of losing things and he had just lost his 3rd set of hiking poles. Hikers occasionally leave their poles in vehicles when hitching a ride, but losing 3 pair had to be some kind of record. I was certain Padre would need poles to conquer the mountains ahead of us. I was tired, but I knew I only had a few more weeks on the trail, just these mountains in New Hampshire and then beautiful Maine. My trail journey entry that night. The climbs are either getting tougher or I'm getting weaker. I'm 63 miles from Mount Washington. I don't know how I'll feel when I'm closer to done with this hike, but right now I'm so ready to be done. I'm just completely worn out right now. Some good news though, only 398.5 miles left. Just a little walk in the park. Early the next morning, Fargo and I laboured up Mount Moosilauke, the first time we had climbed above tree level in New Hampshire. Close to the summit, trees were short and stubby, and a sign warned that we were walking through fragile alpine vegetation and requested that we stay on the marked trails. How can anything that survives these harsh mountaintop conditions be considered fragile? Trail signs disappeared, and the path was marked instead by rock cairns, small directional piles of rocks. We finally stood at the top of our first White Mountain and took in the incredible view. Waves of blue and purple peaks stretched to the horizon. A gusting and chilly wind reminded us to keep moving, and we picked our way down the rocky descent alongside a tumble of waterfalls. We manoeuvred down the mountain, finding only small blocks of wood fastened to the rock faces for footholds. We'd conquered the first mountain of the 117 miles of trail that crossed the White Mountains. Moosilauke, it turned out, was also one of the easiest climbs. The sun made a short appearance. The small brook we followed was too inviting. Fargo jumped in for a swim, as was his habit. Rather than hiking on, I waited for him, lying on my back on the trail and soaking up the welcome sunshine. I heard clomping and clicking before Padre came into view. He was moving fast, and I saw he'd been outfitted with another set of hiking poles. He explained that he'd found them back at the hostel. I admired the pink poles with purple baskets, obviously a girl's set of ski poles. Well, Padre, that's quite a fashion statement you're making. Too bad not many people will have a chance to admire them, since you'll probably lose those too. Padre had decided to make a big push for the finish, and he thought this would be the last time we'd see each other. We exchanged addresses and said our goodbyes, and my friend and his pink poles were gone. Trail Journal, July 19th, at the Galehead Hut. I hiked the 10.4 hardest miles of my life. I never imagined how difficult the trail would be in New Hampshire. The stories were true. Hiking conditions here were brutal. Every mountain climb was an exhausting experience. Rain, wind and sleet battled us as we struggled up and down steep trails crossing Mount Lincoln, Mount Lafayette and Mount Garfield. We had hiked only 10 miles on the day we arrived at Galehead Hut early in the afternoon. Wet and shivering, Fargo and I inquired about doing a work for stay and were told that those spots were usually not given out until at least 4 o'clock. The next hut was still 8 miles away, and we had no intention of hiking 1 mile further that day. We stayed at the desk and informed the woman that we intended to be the first 4 o'clock hikers she would see. We were not going to stray far from that spot. Only one other hiker showed up that afternoon, and all 3 of us were hired. The huts in the White Mountains are staffed primarily by college kids, each hut having its own group of workers who are referred to as the crew. Summer jobs at these mountain lodges are prized gigs, but there's hard work involved too. No roads lead to the huts. All food and supplies have to be carried or helicoptered in. Through hikers are usually welcomed, since they not only help with the work, but also assist in disposing of leftover food. The third hiker that day was St. Gertrude. I'd first met Gertie and Stretch back at the pavilion at the Greymore Spiritual Life Centre, and later they had stopped for a visit at the pharmacy shelter. Now Gertie arrived at Galehead Hut alone. "What happened to Stretch?" I asked him. He tore a muscle and had to leave the trail for a while. Many hikers, especially the younger ones, spent time each morning stretching their muscles. They'd push against trees, pull up their legs and contort themselves into pretzel knots, preparing their bodies for a hiking day. My preparation each day was to put on my pack and start walking. By the time others were sufficiently stretched out, I was a mile down the trail. Stretch had torn a shoulder muscle while doing push-ups in preparation for his daily hike. We enjoyed a lively evening, socialising with about 40 other guests. A women's church group was there on a retreat, and we discovered that we had met part of their group the night before at the Liberty Springs tent site on Franconia Ridge. Apparently the women had been given a choice of tenting or staying at the hut. We assured the women at Galehead that they had made a smart decision. The night before on Franconia Ridge had been miserable. Fargo and I had set up our tents on wooden platforms and spent a cold, miserable night just trying to stay dry and warm. I put on every article of clothing, including my rain gear, and several times I lit my cook stove hoping for some meagre warmth. The wind howled all night and cold rain battered my tent. The group of ladies tenting at the same site had the misfortune of spending the night on that cold and stormy ridge while their counterparts were warm and dry at Galehead Hut. While we talked with the guests, the staff took a radio call. The ladies' group leader back at the Liberty Springs tent site had fallen and broken a leg. A rescue crew was on its way. Fargo, Gertie and I slept on the hardwood floor of the dining room that night, and I was thankful simply to be warm and dry. We could not leave the next morning till our work was finished. After the guests had eaten breakfast and checked out, we shook out dozens of blankets and swept the entire hut. The chores were a welcome change from labouring up and down mountains with a heavy pack. We finished at 9 o'clock and collected pay in the form of breakfast leftovers. We had hoisted our packs and were ready to leave when we spotted 2 familiar figures coming up the trail toward the hut. I recognised Franklin and Einstein. They'd met each other back at Delaware Water Gap and had hiked together since then. They had learned from a southbound hiker that a possum was just ahead of them, so they had left camp early that morning to try to catch up with me. I was delighted to see my friends again. We dropped our packs and took time to catch up on all the trail chatter, joining them for another round of food before starting our day on the trail. The AMC huts in the White Mountains offer a hiker special. For $2 we could eat whatever soup was left from the previous night's meal, all the soup we wanted as long as the supply lasted. When we left Galehead, we planned to hike 7 miles to the Zealand Falls hut, resupply on their soup, and end our day at a campground in Crawford Notch. The 7 miles to Zealand Falls were rainy and slippery. This hut is a delightful place to stay, with a beautiful falls nearby, but we'd seen enough water. We wanted only to be inside and dry. The 5 of us soon devoured all the cornbread and bean soup remaining from the night before. Before we left the hut, I mooched a garbage bag from a crew member, emptied the contents of my backpack and lined it with the bag. The rain had been constant and blowing, and my pack cover couldn't keep the contents dry. The garbage bag was one of my better decisions. It did protect my few possessions from the almost constant rain during the next several weeks. After our soup break, we had 8 miles to Highway 302 at Crawford Notch. We'd been informed that these were the easiest miles in the White Mountain stretch. At the road crossing, we'd head 3 miles down the highway to the Crawford Notch General Store and campground. Gertie and I decided to see how quickly we could do these miles. Our plan was to make the campground in record time, then send a vehicle back to where the trail crossed the road and pick up the other 3 who lay behind us. For the next 2 hours, Gertie splashed and skidded over rocks and rivers at a ridiculously reckless pace, and several feet behind him charged one equally ridiculous apostle. I was determined he would not out-hike me, unless of course I fell and broke every bone in my body. We foolishly risked life and limb, but oh, what a thrill it was to emerge 2.5 hours later at the road crossing, with me right on Gertie's heels. We attempted hitchhiking the 3 miles to the campground, but no one would pick up 2 hikers walking along the road in the pouring rain. When we reached the camp store, Franklin greeted us at the front door. While we were walking the 3 miles in the rain, the other 3 had come to the road crossing and the first passing car had picked them up. They rode to the campground while we walked in the rain. "Thanks for picking us up, Franklin," I complained. "We waved when we passed you, but you were already close to the store and we didn't want to interrupt your challenge." Exactly 5 bunks were still available in the bunkhouse, and so we were soon 5 happy hikers. A laundry room and a shower house added to our bliss. All evening we lounged, eating and talking and attempting to dry out our backpacks. Outside, the cold downpour continued. I didn't care about the rain. I was dry, and I was among friends. Mount Washington lay ahead of us. At 6,288 feet, that mountain would be our second highest climb on the trail, second only to Clingman's Dome back in the Smoky Mountains. Our next stop will be the Lake of the Clouds hut, just 1.5 miles short of the summit. The towering mountain endures the world's most extreme weather conditions. Mount Washington sees snowfall every month of the year. The highest wind ever measured on planet Earth occurred at the summit on April the 12th, 1934, measuring 231 miles per hour. The main building on top of the mountain is built to withstand gusts of up to 300 miles per hour, and all other buildings are chained to the ground. Storm systems seem to meet on this summit and result in extreme weather conditions. If snow and wind and storms do not deter the visitor, fog will often obscure their views. The forecast was lousy, with weather warnings out for the mountain. We awoke to a damp, misty morning at the campground. Franklin and Einstein had already planned to take a 0 day to recover from several long and difficult days and to wait for better weather before climbing Mount Washington. Fargo was torn between hiking with me or heeding the dire forecast and staying at the bunkhouse. I remarked that if my hike had been dictated by weather forecasts, I'd probably still be in Georgia. Eventually he decided to stay behind. If the sun happened to come out, he'd try to catch up with Gertie and me. We two caught a ride back to the trail and started our climb, gaining several thousand feet in elevation in just 2 miles. At Webster Cliffs, the clouds gave way to sunshine and we enjoyed a splendid view over the valley and the 3-mile road walk we'd done in the previous evening's rain. Mount Webster and Mount Jackson were between us and soup at the next hut, the Mitzvah Spring Hut. Fargo had renamed it the Bar Mitzvah Hut. Thinking about that soup as we hiked, I tried to guess what kind it would be. I was craving chicken noodle, so I was happy to find that the soup of the day at Bar Mitzvah Hut was turkey noodle. Gertie and I each had 2 large steaming bowls of soup and several pieces of cornbread and, refreshed, tackled the remaining 6 miles upward to Lakes of the Clouds hut. About this time, the sun had also peeked out down at the campground. Fargo soon realised the error of his calculations. He was now behind his hiking partner and, in addition, had lost his connection to the missus back in Skansen. He'd been using my phone to keep in touch with home. Now that I was gone, how would he keep up with the progress of his house sale? He took off in pursuit of Gertie and me and made it as far as the Bar Mitzvah hut before stopping for the night. By then, we were 6 miles ahead of him at Lakes of the Clouds. Although he made a valiant attempt to overcome that 6-mile gap, it would be 230 miles before we met again. I'd just crossed Mount Franklin at 5,004 feet when the sky opened up and dumped cold, hard rain. The trail became a rushing torrent and I splashed through water, streaming around and over my feet. I'd almost reached Lakes of the Clouds hut when the rain stopped and a rainbow pierced the grey clouds and arched over the mountainside. For a rain-drenched hiker, it was a beautiful reminder of God's promise to never again destroy the earth with a flood. There would be times in the next few weeks, though, when I wondered if God had excluded Maine from that promise. Trail Journal from Lakes of the Clouds hut. I can't begin to describe how I hate getting rained on, so I won't. One of these days I expect to wake up covered in moss and sprouting mushrooms. Hikers know Lakes of the Clouds hut as Lake of the Clouds. Its popularity is not surprising. The hut sits dramatically on the rocky mountainside just below Mount Washington's summit, looking out over lesser peaks and drifting clouds. This hut is the largest of the 8, built to accommodate 92 guests, and it was completely full when I arrived. A crew party was scheduled for that night at the next hut, Madison Spring, which had closed for the night. The crew from Lakes of the Clouds was also invited to the party, so our hut that night was staffed by former workers filling in for the regulars. They were delighted when Gertie and I showed up wanting to do a work for stay, and even more excited when they discovered that I had 25 years of restaurant experience. Hand-washing dishes for 92 guests was more than I'd bargained for. Gertie and I joined the guests later for a question and answer session about our through hike. We did eat well, and later that evening I unrolled my sleeping bag and slept on the same tabletop where I'd eaten just a few hours earlier. At least our work was done that night, and we could leave early in the morning. Only 1,200 feet remained to summit Mount Washington, but when we arrived we found the mountaintop shrouded in heavy mist. No views today. Inside the summit house, I noticed a plaque memorialising people who had been killed in various mishaps on the mountain. It listed over 100 persons who had died there, noting name, age and reason for demise. Not the most pleasant way to start another hiking day on a dangerous mountain range. We left the summit, crossed the cog railroad tracks and headed for Madison Spring hut. Much to my relief, the trail passed below the summit of Mount Clay, Mount Adams and Mount Jefferson. Along the trail we passed crew members returning from their party at Madison Spring hut the night before. I hoped the temporary help back at Lakes of the Clouds would hang around for a while, because these young folks did not look ready for prime time. At Madison Spring hut, everything was still in slow motion. It had been quite a party. Apparently soup had not been on the menu last night. We were told no soup was available. What do you mean no soup? I asked. Every other hut has had soup for us. I think we had chicken noodle soup several nights ago, but it would take time to heat it up, the girl replied. But those were magic words. We would wait. The rain had started again and we were in no mood to continue hiking soaked and soupless. We spread our wet clothes across tables and settled in and waited. And waited. Our reluctant hostess at last realised the only way to get rid of the 2 pesky hikers was to give them their soup. It was worth the wait. Life just runs better on hot chicken noodle soup. We navigated a descent of almost 4,000 feet, forded 7 streams and put Mount Madison behind us. Our 15-day climb was completed when we arrived at Pinkham Notch, where New Hampshire Route 16 cuts through the mountains. Pinkham Notch Visitor Centre offers a bunkhouse, camp store and dining room. We would again have a bed and a shower. In the last 5 nights I'd slept on a wooden tent platform, a hardwood floor, a tabletop and 2 bunk beds. I took my shoes into the shower with me as I'd done earlier that week. Since they couldn't possibly get any wetter, they might as well be clean. During a delicious meal in the dining room, Gertie and I discussed our reasons for doing our through hikes. His wife had recently informed him she wanted a divorce. He was finding his peace on the trail. Why follow a 5-step program to peace when you can just as easily shoulder a backpack and walk 5 million steps to peace and freedom? The dining room opened early the next morning, so we finished off a huge breakfast to store as much energy as possible for the day. We walked through another wet and foggy morning, over Route 16, up the Wildcat Ridge Trail to the top of Wildcat Mountain, gaining 2,000 feet of elevation over 2 miles. I'd heard of through hikers quitting their trek in the White Mountains, and I'd always been puzzled. How could one quit so close to the goal? Now I understood. This was no longer hiking. This was difficult rock climbing, made even more difficult by wet and slippery rocks. 3 times during my week in the White Mountains, hikers fell, broke bones, and had to be rescued. Gertie and I finally rounded the top of Wildcat Peak E. In blowing wind and rain, we hiked past the Skyride Gondola, a chairlift available for folks wishing to enjoy the view from Wildcat without the workout we had just suffered. Wildcat has 5 peaks, A, B, C, D and E, and we crossed them all. I'd been concerned that the presidential range in the White Mountains might not have enough mountains for each president to have his own namesake, but apparently there is no need to worry. We crossed all 5 peaks and arrived at Carter Notch. Ahead was an afternoon of more climbs, South, Middle and North Carter Mountains, but we needed soup before attempting more climbs. Carter Notch Hut is the last hut in the Whites. The morning had been miserable with cold rain, and we needed to get inside and warm up. By the next day we would be in Gorham, where I hoped a package waiting for me at the post office would have my winter gear. I'd been warned about the possibility of bad weather in the mountains, but was still surprised by just how miserable July could be. Today's treat was bean and pasta soup. That was a new taste for me and just confirmed that you can put any 2 ingredients in broth and call it soup. But the hot mixture brought new vigour to my tired and wet body, and we continued our all-day slog over more mountains. The Appalachian Trail through the White Mountains is notoriously difficult to follow. Instead of trail signs indicating Appalachian Trail, different sections of the trail were given alternate names. A hiker who does not know the name of a section he's currently hiking can easily take a wrong turn. Many frustrated hikers have taken the matter into their own hands and carved 80 directions on signs. Or sometimes hikers leave their own handmade signs for those following them. These impromptu guides probably saved many thru hikers from needlessly getting lost. Just beyond North Carter Mountain was Imp Campsite. We'd been battered by the weather and drained by climbs for 13 miles, and I wanted to get out of my wet clothes. The Imp shelter offered us sanctuary. The front of the building was partially enclosed, affording even more shelter. One old gentleman had also taken refuge there. He was on a section hike, but the weather was so miserable he had spent several days at the shelter. On the previous evening, a rescue party had brought a man with a broken leg to the shelter and waited for daylight to carry him out. It took 12 paramedics to transport the injured man across this slippery and rocky trail. The eccentric guy seemed genuinely pleased to have the company of 2 thru hikers during his solitary stay. He had just finished cooking his meal, and I thought the mice would be delighted. He had spilled half his food over a large area. There were only the 3 of us, so I set up my tent in the shelter and ditched wet clothes and slipped into my sleeping bag. Again I lit my stove inside the tent and soon had a warm and cosy spot. The elderly gentleman kept up a steady stream of conversation. Sometimes Gertie answered, sometimes I did, and sometimes he answered himself. Outside the wind howled and mist swirled around the shelter as darkness fell. I made a journal entry, noting that it had been another cold, wet, foggy, windy, muddy day in the White Mountains, very nasty up along the ridges. But I could hike through just about anything as long as I had hopes of being warm and dry at the end of the day. I had survived another day and I was content. Our section hiker was singing, his tenor serenading the wind and the rain. Mariah. It's a lilting and haunting melody about days of love when the sun was always shining. The song could not have been about New Hampshire, since the sun almost never was shining out there. I wondered if our tenor knew the mountain ahead of us was Mount Moriah. At 6 a.m, I donned still wet clothes and left the Imp shelter. We were 8 miles from the highway that would take us into Gorham, New Hampshire. Once over Mount Moriah, we rolled downhill. Somehow we managed 3 river crossings. Our guidebooks showed footbridges across the rivers, but there were none to be seen. They were submerged under the swollen waters. We waded across, and although the water was never above our knees, manoeuvring around rocks and against the strong currents was challenging, and the rain was still coming down. Reaching US 2, we still had a road walk of 3.6 miles into Gorham. Happily, someone took pity on us and gave us a ride into town. At the edge of Gorham is the barn at Libby House. The barn is a popular hiker hostel. Gertie and I agreed that after the unrelenting misery of the Whites, we deserved more luxury than the hostel. Scattered along a mile on the outskirts of town are numerous hotels, shops and restaurants. The Royalty Inn seemed an appropriate place for 2 beaten-up hikers. As I walked towards the rooms stretching behind the main building, I realised I'd been here before. The front of the inn had been remodelled, but the rooms were the same. I'd forgotten that I had ever been in Gorham before, but now I'd stumbled into the same motel where our family had stayed many years ago on a trip to New England. Our family was young and time was still moving slowly. So much had happened since that trip. Now the children were grown and had moved on, and Mary was gone. I had grandchildren. Grandchildren? I felt as if I'd barely had time to enjoy my children. The memories brought a sadness. I wanted to go back in time and enjoy my family more, and I would do things differently. I had spent so much time preparing for the future that I had neglected to enjoy the present. Now that present was the past. What had happened to all those years? The room Gertie and I shared was only 2 floors down from the room our family had rented. I recalled the morning we left the motel. We were packing up to leave and were heading to Maine. I had backed our van up to our front door. The window in the room next to ours was open. Our van was an oil burner, and the smoke from the exhaust set off the smoke alarm in the next room. The maids couldn't figure out what had happened, so I told Mary and the kids to get in the van quickly so we could disappear before I set off more alarms. "But shouldn't you let them know why the alarm's going off?" Mary said. "No, I'm too embarrassed. What does it matter? I'll never be back here again." But here I was, again. Between downpours, Gertie and I dashed to the post office and picked up my box with food and winter gear. At Burger King, we had consumed large quantities of flame-broiled goodness, then stopped at a Dunkin' Donuts and topped off our feasting with several of those small cakes. One more stop to replenish our supply of hiking snacks, and we were back in our room, drying out our clothes. Gertie had started his hike long before I'd left Springer Mountain, and he was a stronger hiker than I. Yet I'd caught up with him. I asked him how that was possible. His explanation told me a lot about the man. Hiking through Virginia, Gertie was crossing a small footbridge when he heard a noise underfoot. Curious, he investigated and discovered a kitten meowing forlornly beneath the bridge. If he left the kitten there, it would probably die. Instead, he rescued it, making a nest in the hat that hung around his neck. Gertie carried the kitten for a day, struggling to keep it in the hat while the kitten constantly tried to climb out. He attempted to give the kitten to other hikers with no success. Several advised him just to turn it loose. If it died, it died. Gertie could not do this. He reversed direction, hiked 20 miles back to a town, and tried to find a home for the kitten. No one wanted the little thing. Folks just told him to abandon it. He would not. He had started to bond with the kitten and could see only one other solution. He would keep it himself. Gertie took a taxi to the nearest airport, where he rented a car. He then drove to his home in Maine, asked a veterinarian friend to keep the kitten for him until he finished his hike, drove back to Virginia, returned the car to the airport, had another taxi take him back to the trail, and then continued his hike. The total cost for his new kitten, named Troll, was close to $660. That explained how I'd caught up with him. I could not imagine why any woman would leave a man with such a tender heart. When I called Ina that night to tentatively set a finish date for my hike, I told her Gertie's kitten story and how amazed I was that a woman could leave a man who does something like that. Her reply was, that's probably why she left him, because he does things like that. Huh? Leaving town the next morning, we stopped at the barn at Libby House, looking for a ride back to the trail. In an oversized easy chair, my friend Padre sat soaking with his foot in a bucket of Epsom salts. "What happened, Padre? I thought I wouldn't see you again. You were headed to the finish line." "Well, the day I told you that, I hiked 35 miles, but we've had so much rain my feet have just been too wet for too long. My toes infected. It'll be several days before I'm ready to hike again. Don't worry, I'll catch up with you soon." Back on the trail, Gertie and I crossed the Androscoggin River and began our last day of hiking in New Hampshire. If all went well, I'd enter Maine sometime later that evening. The sky had finally cleared up, and behind me I could see the mountain range I'd crossed. Those same mountains had hidden in rain and fog for most of my time there, but as I hiked the last miles toward Maine, the whites were silhouetted in blue and green against a clear, sunny sky. Today was my last day of hiking with Gertie. His kitten had altered his schedule, and he needed to do some big mileage days if he was to finish by his deadline. I'd kept up with him on that one headlong dash to Crawford Notch, but I wouldn't be able to match his pace all the way to Katahdin. The mountain climbs were at lower elevations now, but the trail was still slow and difficult. The last climb of the day was Mount Success, aptly named for my finish in New Hampshire. I crawled up and down rock climbs and waded through stretches of mud. I sure miss those huts and that hot soup. But I was about to become an ingredient in a large primordial soup myself. Years of rain and decaying matter had settled and created a swampy bog almost at the top of Mount Success. Narrow boards formed a walkway over the area, but the waters had risen with the large amount of rain and several of the boards were now underwater. I tapped with my poles, trying to stay on the straight and narrow, but I slipped. That is, one hiking pole slipped off a board and I lost my balance and sank into the oozing, peat-filled bog. In a panic, I reached out and grabbed a board and slowly dragged myself from the muck clutching me. "Congratulations, Mum and Dad, it's a boy," I murmured as I lay there covered with mud and mire. After regaining my balance and composure and scraping off as much of the goop as I could, I finished crossing Mount Success. I was now a genuine born-again hiker. I had been immersed, I'd become a new creature, albeit a swamp creature. Old things had passed away. Yes, New Hampshire was behind me, and all things had become new. I was in Maine. The small blue and white sign tacked to a tree brought an incredible rush of feeling. Welcome to Maine, the way life should be. At last, my 14th and final state, I gave that little sign a welcome kiss and stepped into Maine. I'd hiked 17 difficult miles and I was exhausted. My journal entry that night admitted, I have never hiked a harder trail in my life. And the morrow would be just as strenuous. Mahoosic Notch was 6 miles ahead of me and was known as the most difficult mile on the entire Appalachian Trail. I stopped at the Carlo Coal shelter and campsite, less than a mile into Maine. The cabin-type shelter lay down a steep, rocky side trail. I filtered 2 litres of cold Maine water from a nearby stream. I had the shelter to myself and hung clothes everywhere, trying to dry out. No one else showed up that evening. I hoped for company, but it was a lonely night. Only a little chipmunk stopped by to share the shelter. Still, I was warm and dry. I again had my winter hat and my Patagonia fleece. Additional weight, yes, but I had a feeling I'd need them as I hiked across this rugged and beautiful state. I was ready for the main event.